morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, out of Voice of Radio. So today, we're continuing our look at the complete history of the Pokemon trading card game by taking a look at EX Legend Maker, a set that I actually found some opened packs for when I was digging around in a box recently. Kinda wish they were unopened, if I'm honest with you, but you can't win them all. EX Legend Maker was released in Japan on the 30th of June 2005, and it was released in English on February the 13th, 2006. Yes, that is a very big gap. But remember, in last week's video on EX Delta Species, I did tell you that there was a translation issue, and that essentially these sets were released in the wrong order. We were supposed to get this and then Delta Species, but because of a translation error, issue, call it what you will, they ended up switching them round. Remember that Legend Maker is actually themed after Mirage Forest, which is where the Holon Tower from Delta Species is actually located. According to the lovely folks over at Bulbapedia, a very nice website used for research, it's all to do with scientists in Holon conducting experiments on Mew and inadvertently causing the creation of Delta Species Pokemon. Oh, nice. Although we weren't always really told all of that when Delta Species came out because of the whole, it came out too gosh darned early. Now this was a set where Japan finally got Battle Frontier. Remember that EX Emerald wasn't actually released in Japan. That set never made it into Japan. It was a set released in the UK, US, Europe, etc. to celebrate the release of the Emerald video game, and some new cards were essentially made for it, including the very relevant See Previous Videos Battle Frontier, which finally got over in Japan. The secret rare box topper for this set was Pikachu Delta, the only Delta Pokemon in the entire set, for what it's worth, and the pre-release card was Tentacruel. So that was kind of fun. Now, having a little bit of a look at the theme decks, here we did have a couple. We had Groundbreaker and Shadowquake, so lots of Earthquake themed stuff. Groundbreaker was a grass fighting theme deck with Golem on the front, and you got yourself a Holo Golem and non-holo versions of Pinsir and Spinder. And Shadowquake was a water psychic theme deck with Gengar on the cover, and as you might expect, you got yourself a holo version of Gengar and non-holo versions of Huntail and Gorbis. And I very much appreciate the fact that they gave you both of them in one theme deck. That's rather nice. That worked out quite nicely. It's also weird to point out that in this particular set, the trainer line was messed up. There were a bunch of different fossils. There were a bunch of different stadiums, 5 stadiums, 3 of which were good, we'll get there in a minute, and 3 fossils, and then a single supporter in terms of Field Worker. And Field Worker did actually make its way into a world-winning deck, albeit as a one-off, so that was kind of cool. Wasn't a phenomenal card, just let you draw 3 and then let your opponent draw 1. Let's not start pretending that Field Worker was some phenomenal card, but it was kind of nice, it was alright. But it was just weird that the trainer line was 3 fossils, 5 stadiums, and 1 supporter. Little bit weird. Now, in terms of the EXs, we did have a few of them. We had Arcanine, Armaldo, Bayonet, Dustox, Flygon, Mew, and Walrein. A couple of which were very, very good. We'll get there in a moment. And in terms of Pokemon Stars, we got ourselves the Regis. Regice, Regirock, and Registeel. And this might be a nice time to pivot into a discussion on the most expensive cards from the set. They were the Registars, that generally you're looking somewhere in the region of about $300 to pick one of them up in mint condition. In terms of the non-stars, it was Mew EX. As we're going to see in a minute, Mew EX, probably the best card in the set. A phenomenal, really, really, really good card. And it's Mew, which makes it very, very popular, and it's an EX, so that's something Mew you'll pay in the region of about $150. It's a rather expensive card. And in terms of the best cards, we might as well start off with Mew. Check the transitions, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the Mew from Legend Maker, Mew EX, of course. There was a regular Mew. We're talking about the EX. It had the attack power move that let you search your deck for an energy and attach it to Mew and then switch to your bench, which was fine in an emergency, but really it was all about the Pokebody Versatile, which let it use the attacks of any Pokemon in play as its own. And that was yours and your opponent's, though you did still need the necessary energy to attack. Now, bearing in mind this was an EX that gave up 2 prizes, it was an attacker, and it only had 90 HP, that should tell you quite how good it was. It actually won the World Championships 2 years in a row. Though I am referring specifically to the Masters Division. In 2006, Jason Klaczynski won his first World Championships with Mutrik, would not be his last, which was a deck based around Mew copying Mutrik EX to trainer lock your opponent. Trainer locking back then was basically item locking. Everything but supporters, really. That was a pretty gosh darn good deck. And then in 2007, we saw Tom Roos winning the Masters Division with, well, it was kind of an Absol Eevees deck, like we saw last week, but then by the same token, it did play 2 copies of Mew EX, so we're not talking some occasional tech. It was a big part of the deck, though it was an Absol Eevees deck, let's be very, very clear about that. Mew EX, and these were not the only decks it appeared in, Mew EX was phenomenal. Now, we also had a lovely pair of Solrock and Lunatone. Now, Lunatone here had an ability which said as long as you have Solrock in play, each fire Pokemon for each player, other than EXs, cannot use any Poké Powers. And then we had a Solrock, which had the Pokebody Lunar Shade, which said if you have a Lunatone in play, each player's colourless Pokemon other than EXs cannot use Poké Powers. And on the one hand, it turned off Porygon 2, and that was kind of lovely, but on the other hand, it turned off Pidgeot. And I've already told you at this stage that Pidgeot was one of the absolute most important cards in the era at that point, so just turning that off was kind of ridiculous. It did see play with the other Solrock and Lunatone we mentioned before, but we'll get to them in a little bit. Now, Bayonet EX was the other EX in the set that was really, really good. It had the Poké Power Shady move that said once during your turn, if it was your active, you could move 1 damage counter from either player's Pokemon to another Pokemon, and that is another Pokemon of either player. It then had Shadow Chant for 2 energy, did 30 damage, plus 10 more for each supporter card in your discard, up to a total of 90 damage, but you could get supporters in your discard pretty quickly, and then you're hitting 90 damage for 2 energy, and a decent weakness. At the time, this was very, very nice. Plus, of course, the moving damage around could set up multiple KOs in one turn, could mean your Pokemon are safe from being KO'd, etc. It was pretty gosh darn good. Also worth noting that Shuppet was a very, very important card as well. And I'm not talking the Shuppet from this set, I am talking the Shuppet that had Ascension. Now, this wouldn't actually come out quite yet. It was in Crystal Guardians, which came out a little while later. But for a colourless energy, you could search your deck for a card that evolved from Shuppet and put it onto Shuppet, basically guaranteeing you that turn 1 Bayonet. At least, you know, it's their turn 1. You can use it the next turn. Now, Girafarig was also a very, very good card then. And honestly, Girafarig was there as a counter to Jirachi. Girafarig had the Pokebody rear sensor. Each player's active Pokemon, excluding Pokemon EX, cannot use any Poké Powers, so you would use this to turn off Jirachi. And at the time, right, Jirachi was an absolutely vital card in so many decks. It really was one of the very, very best cards around at the time. It was the one whereby if it was in the active, you could look at the top 5 cards of your deck, choose any card you wanted, and put it into your hand, and then it made both active Pokemon asleep. It was ridiculous for consistency, and Girafarig worked on your bench. So you could literally just whack a Girafarig down on your bench, and then you would be safe for the entire game. That was, that was a little bit good. Muck was a rather nice Pokemon. It had a Pokebody Stench. If it was active, it turned off Poke Powers for both players. Also, Poison and stopping you retreat for 2 energy plus 20 damage was fine, but it was really there to block Poke Powers. Find a deck reliant on Poke Powers, whack Muck in the active, and fine, the attacks weren't great, but if you're shutting down your opponent's deck, it really doesn't matter. Lapras was a very nice card because of support navigation. When you played it from your hand onto your bench, you could search your deck for any supporter and put it into your hand. Anyone that was playing a little while ago with Tapu Lele GX would realise quite how good this could be, and especially as a single prize Pokemon, yeah, that's pretty gosh darned awesome. Roselia was a weirdly good card. It had the Pokebody Reactive Aroma. If it had any React energy cards attached to it, you removed the damage counter from each of your non-EX Pokemon with any React energy cards attached to it between turns. Sounds lovely, but that's not why we played it. We played it for Flick Poison. 1 colorless energy and you switched your opponent's bench Pokemon with one of the defending Pokemon, and then poisoned it. And this was for Mew. You wouldn't really ever attack with Roselia. This would be what you would use in some versions of Mew, some of the more disruptive versions, to strand a Pokemon in the active while poisoning it. It was a lot of fun. Wobbuffet was a very nice card, if you evolved it. As long as it was an evolved Pokemon, your opponent had to pay 1 more colorless energy to retreat his active Pokemon. Or her active Pokemon. And bearing in mind we had Wynaut in the set, and essentially Wynaut could evolve into it, which was nice. And then when you did, you just made it more difficult for your opponent to retreat. Again, in disruptive decks where you're trying to stick Pokemon in the active, this was a very, very nice option indeed. And finally, Dunsparce. Dunsparce was a very particular kind of card. The main thing here, I mean, if it was active, your opponent's Dunsparce couldn't attack. I love how weirdly specific that is. Wasn't great, but it was fun. But tripping turn, 1 colorless energy, the defending Pokemon is confused, and you may switch to the bench. In Politoed EX decks, those were hit and run decks where you would flick to the bench and stick something like a Fossil active that didn't give up a prize. This was a really good card. You would confuse your opponent, and then stick a Fossil up, and then you would start going for the whole Politoed Fossil thing. But not only did your opponent have to try and get through the fossils to get to Politoed, they had to flip a coin just to get through the confusion beforehand. It was fun. Now, I did tell you that there were 5 stadiums in the set and 3 of them were very good. One of the really good ones here was Cursed Stone. At any time between turns, each player puts 1 damage counter on his or her Pokemon that has a Poke Power. And in this video and in previous videos, I've shown you a bunch of really good Poke Powers. This just put extra damage down on them. Bearing in mind, HP was lower then than it is nowadays, unless you're watching this far in the future and HPs have just plummeted down, but I'm willing to bet that hasn't happened. So this had a much bigger impact than other cards nowadays. And it was any Pokemon with a Poke Power, not just EXs and stuff like that. This could take a lot of very big cheeky KOs. We also saw a lot of play and a lot of love for Giant Stump. It said that each player could not have more than 3 bench Pokemon, and each player discarded bench Pokemon and any cards attached to them until they had 3 benched Pokemon. And this was really good in decks that could survive with a lower bench, but it was also good for just taking out liabilities. If you had Pokemon on your bench that you didn't want there, they had high retreat, or they gave up prizes, etc., you could use this to get rid of them, and that was fun. And finally, Power Tree. Once during each player's turn, if the player has no special energy cards in his or her discard pile, that player searches his or her discard pile for a basic energy and puts it into their hand. It was really nice basic energy recovery, and yeah, sure, it was only if you weren't playing any special energy, but then again, there were plenty of decks out there that weren't, so that was fine. And like I've said, Fieldworker saw a little bit of play in that Flyvies deck, but don't get terribly excited, it wasn't a phenomenal card. Now, looking at the best decks around at the time, we probably have to start with Mutrik. Now, Mutrik did literally win the World Championships in Masters. It was, like I say, the first of Jason Kaczynski's 3 World Championships, unless you're watching this in the future and he's won more, which I wouldn't put past him. We had Mew that could copy any attack of any of your Pokemon, and then Mutrik here for 2 energy, 40 damage, and your opponent couldn't play any trainer cards from his or her hand during your opponent's next turn. So you would sit there and you would just stop them playing trainer cards. Except you could lock a Battle Frontier into play, because your opponent was also banned from playing stadiums while you were using this. So what you would essentially do is you would pop a Battle Frontier down, turning off your opponent's abilities that they were using to set up. And sure, 40 damage wasn't a huge amount of damage, but it didn't need to be a huge amount of damage, because you would have the luxury of just sitting there while your opponent couldn't get set up. Although Cursed Stone was also another very nice option, because you would just be dropping damage down while your opponent couldn't set up, and that would be kind of hilarious. And this deck did tend to play Girafarig, because again, you're turning off Poke Powers, you were using Poke Bodies, you're fine, and it would again play Roselia to slow down and hurt your opponent. Now, I've told you about the Solrock and Lunatone from this set, but it did actually form an archetype of its own back with the other Solrock and Lunatone that came around in EX Deoxys. Now, it is worth pointing out that the version that was printed as a Worlds deck was the Senior World Champion in 2006, and that did actually play 3 of each of the Deoxys and 1 of each of these, but that doesn't mean these weren't nice techs. Solrock gave each Lunatone you had 80 HP maximum, and for 1 Psychic Energy did 10 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon for each Lunatone you had in play, so hopefully 40 snipe. Lunatone gave all of your Solrock free retreat, but for 2 energy did 20 damage plus 10 more for each Solrock you had in play, so 60 damage as a fighting Pokemon hitting a good weakness, and again, that built up very, very quickly. And it just led to a really good deck. Bearing in mind to turning off abilities and all as well, this was a very good deck while it was around. Now, what was also very strange, of course, is that Bayonet was a deck, and Bayonet was very much a deck in and of itself, right? The main part of the deck was a 4/4 Bayonet deck that would just sit there and smash. Now, it did actually play one of the Bayonet from Crystal Guardians, I'm sorry we're not there yet, we'll get there soon, that just made you immune to EXs. Remember that Bayonet and Bayonet EX have different names, so you could play 4 of the EX and 1 of these. But it did actually play a 1/1 Lunarock line from this set, because when you had them both down, you turned off abilities of colorless and fire Pokemon, and that was very, very important. And at this stage, you might be thinking, well, hang on a second, that is a lot of different decks trying to get a Pidgeot counter. Yes. It just makes me sad that so many of them also countered Porygon 2, which blatantly was my preference over Pidgeot, because I love me some Porygon. There was also an awesome combo here with Jolteon Star. Remember that when you played it, you put 1 damage counter on each active Pokemon, yours and your opponent's, but then you could move that damage from your Pokemon to one of your opponents. That was a very, very fun little combo. And the last deck I really want to shout out here was Mew Lock. Now, I need to give a shout out to the lovely Jason Kaczynski, yeah, him, who did a brilliant blog laying out a bunch of deck lists. And I'm taking this one very much from him here. It was a very, very awkward deck. Now, the theory of the deck was to basically use Mew to copy whatever you needed to completely shut down your opponent. Roselia was very, very important here, as you might expect. POW Hand Extension became a very good card because you moved 1 energy card from the defending Pokemon to another of your opponent's Pokemon, or switched one of your opponent's bench with the defending Pokemon, i.e. you're just sticking a Pokemon in the active using that or Roselia to try and make sure that your opponent just is not able to do anything. Then, of course, the Wobbuffet from this set was extremely important to try and make sure they couldn't get out of the active. Yes, Wobbuffet stacked, so play a 2/2 line and your opponent's retreat cost is increased by 2, which is kind of funny. And then, of course, once you had the right Pokemon stuck in the active, Power Hand Extension came back not as a gusting effect, but it came back as an energy denial effect, which was kind of hilarious. And then at some point when your opponent just has absolutely nothing left, in comes Jinx using pure power to perform damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way that you like. Now this was very important because what you would actually do is take 6 prizes in one turn. Remember, Rocket's admin was still everywhere back then, punished you for taking too many prizes too quickly. So you would just use Jinx to put damage down and then take all 6 prizes in one turn and then sit there having a little bit of a cackle. And as well as Girafarig turning off your opponent's Pokemon powers here, we also had Stantler's Push Away, 2 energy, 20 damage, and you could just discard a trainer card from your opponent's hand. So if they were drawing into stuff that they could use to break the lock, you would use this to stop them not breaking the lock, and life was fun. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was EX Legend Maker, a slightly shorter video than we've done for some recent sets. I have told you all the facts you need to know, I've shown you all the best cards, and I've walked you through 4 decks that were made with this set, really made with the set, that were all very, very good. I mean, they were all, meta-defining decks. But now it's over to you, lovely ladies and gentlemen. I want to know which of these decks you played, which of these cards you played, which were your favourite. Go nuts in the comment section, but be nice! And make sure you spam the like button, right? Because, the views on these videos aren't as high as I was hoping. But they're so much fun to make, and I get so much good feedback. So I'm going to keep making them. Just spam the like button, would you? I love you. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.